Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the State and Local Government Committee. My name is Jim Katsafikis. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Perkins Thompson in Portland. But most importantly for this afternoon, chair of the Abandoned and Discontinued Roads Commission. It's a 12-member commission that was established by legislation passed in the last session to review and make recommendations on laws regarding abandoned and discontinued roads, and also to comment on existing legislation or upcoming legislation if you would like any information or some suggestions from the commission. It's again a 12-member commission, and 5 of my fellow commissioners are here today. I hope that we're just under the quorum, so we won't have an illegal meeting here. We don't want to do that. But there are members who are attending, watching this on the screen as well. I'll briefly review that, and I think if you have questions for me or for other members who may want to introduce themselves and may have a comment or two, we'd like to do that. We want to keep it brief. We know that you have quite a bit more work to do, so we'll try to get through this expediently. I believe that each of you had received a copy of our report. There was a report and then a little bit heavier appendix that went along with it. We were asked by the legislature to consider, with regard to these abandoned and discontinued roads, and are we all familiar with the concepts of abandoned and discontinued roads? You may have heard it too much. I know when I was a staff attorney at Maine Municipal Association, about 20% of the calls that I'd received for legal assistance from towns involved abandoned and discontinued roads. When there's a town way, a town is legally obligated by state law to maintain a road safe and convenient for passage by motor vehicle. If it doesn't, 3 or more persons can go to the county commissioners, and the county commissioners can order the town to maintain those town ways. And when I say town ways, I'm talking streets, boulevards, the general roads that we all know in our cities and towns. What can happen, though, is that the town may not want the liability anymore. There may not be people living out there. There may only be a logging road. There may not be a reason to go out to have to plow, grade, maintain, pave, fix the potholes. And so towns can positively come forward and discontinue some or all of those town ways that they don't want to maintain anymore. That's a discontinuance process. And since 1965, what the legislature has provided that when a town discontinues, there's automatically retained a public easement. So the public still has access. The abutters still have access because they may not have private easements in their deeds. And the town has the right, but not the obligation to maintain those residual public easements. There's another way that a road can go away, a town road right or a town road responsibility, and that's by abandonment. Abandonment can happen in 2 ways. One is just by passage of time. The public doesn't use the road anymore. All rights then disappear. How long does it take? No magic number. And state Supreme Court decisions go anywhere between 20 and 100 years and showing. So there aren't a lot of guidelines, and these issues can go to the courts. Because of that, the legislature created a statutory presumption of abandonment. If a municipality does not spend money to maintain a way for 30 consecutive years, then it's presumed that that road is abandoned, and what's left is a public easement, just like in the formal discontinuance. And so you go to the town to ask them, is there a presumption of abandonment for a road? And the select board or the council will make that determination, which is then appealable. So that's how we wind up with abandoned and discontinued roads. If you're a landowner who owns property on one of those roads and there's a public easement that remains, or maybe there was no public easement retained, and so you may not even have a deeded easement to your property, there are issues as to how do I get to and from my house? Who maintains the road? Can other people use it? What's my liability? These sorts of questions have come before this committee and before the legislature many times and have resulted in many amendments, most recently since 2018, to these abandonment and discontinuance laws. As a result of all the questions and the concerns about these roads, the legislature created this commission as a standing commission. And so we were charged with looking at property owner liability that results from the public's use of these abandoned and discontinued roads, whether it's a wise idea to retain the public easement when there's a discontinuance or a statutory abandonment, and what the scope might be of the public use, statutory terminology related to these roads, the statutory process for abandonment, and legal barriers to determining what the status of a particular road is. If you can imagine, if you want to buy a lot or you want to buy a house, you'd like to know that you can get there. And whether you can get there from here is sometimes a little difficult to determine. We are also asked to prioritize the impact of some matters on the owners of abutting properties, on these abandoned and discontinued roads, owners of property that's accessible only by traveling on these roads, recreational users, members of the public, and municipal, county, and state governments. We were asked to develop recommendations on ways to address these road issues, including recommended statutory changes, and to review legislation and report back on requests from this and other legislative committees. Our first report was due on February 1st. We did meet that deadline. We met 6 times in advance between October and the end of January, conducted a public hearing, received much input, which is the reason in part why this appendix is so hefty. And these comments were varied and many. They varied by perspective. You can imagine that property owners have a little bit different take on it than people who would want to use these public easements, private roads, and ways for recreational purposes, and for local governments that may have to maintain some of these. But there were some common themes that emerged. I just want to touch on those. For those people who own properties on a public easement, the question is, the public has a right to use it, and the town or the city has the right to maintain, but not the obligation to do so. So what happens if you go out there and fix up that road so you can get to your property? Well, you're liable. If someone were to be hurt, they could sue you for what you do in maintaining that easement, which is necessary to get to your own house. The work that you've done could be destroyed by the logging company that owns the next lot over, or by ATVs, or by just public use and kids who want to just recklessly go do donuts in a dirt road. So there are issues about that. We are suggesting that there be an extension of the concept of limitation of liability for people who maintain these public easements where the town doesn't want to, where the city doesn't want to. And so people will do this, they maintain the road. There's limited liability if they do it properly, just like there's limited liability from allowing the public to use your property for recreational uses. For people who are along abandoned and discontinued roads where there's no public easement, there are problems we recognize where the owners at the front of the road may cut off access altogether or try to sell it to the back lots, charge them to use those roads. We are proposing that the legislature continue this concept of retaining a public easement when a road is discontinued. Confusing terminology is a problem. There's a term called private way. Back when farmers used to try to get their goods to market, they could give land to the town could accept it. It was a private way subject to gates and bars. Those by statute all became public easements back in 1977. You can also create a public easement, as I said, through discontinuance or statutory abandonment. And a town can also go out and create a public easement in order to provide access to recreational areas. 3 different ways to create a public easement. With a private way, those old private ways became public easements. And so you think of public access. But under the state highway laws, private way is defined as a private road. And then we have the road association statute, which conflates the 2 terms of private ways and private roads. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of potential for people out there to misunderstand what's going on. And so we're aware of that. And we certainly want to assist in helping the legislature and its committees understand this terminology and try to work to undo that confusion, to try to dispel the confusion. The process to discontinue a road has become more difficult. It changes over time, and trying to determine legal status of a road is difficult. It's fact specific. It depends when things happened. When was there a discontinuance? When was there an abandonment? What's the period of time we're looking at? What was the law at that time, as well as what were the facts? Trying to determine those is expensive. It invites litigation. So we're proposing and recommending that the legislature look at that, look if there's try to make sure that you're consistent in your terminology, try to assist by encouraging road inventories by municipalities, by the state. The Maine Department of Transportation is a wonderful tool that we just learned about, where you can determine whether a road is publicly maintained. It's right on their website. And that's something that we could try to let the public know more about. Well, we ask that the legislature be cognizant of these issues with regard to road liability, with regard to terminology, making sure we're consistent so that we're consistent in the highway laws in Title 23, the use of the highways in Title 29A, and the real estate involving them in Title 33. We need to make sure that all of these work together to try to reduce confusion out there. And perhaps we could the legislature might encourage the use of alternative dispute resolution to determine what the legal status is of roads. That's something that we suggest would make it less lengthy and less costly. And then right now, if you go to buy a lot, there's a seller's disclosure that's required as a result of recent actions of the legislature. And the seller is required to say what the status of the road is, if you know whether there's legal access to the road. Perhaps that might be tied in to ask the question, is there a publicly maintained way to provide access? Because the Maine Department of Transportation keeps that tool online of the publicly available rights of way, so that the two could speak to each other. That disclosure might mean more. There may be fewer people who say unknown when they're filling out those disclosures. So that's briefly what we were up to in the time that we had. We had 6 meetings. And there's a lot of material there to go over, to review, to learn about, and then to try to come up with recommendations. We're available as a resource to this committee and to other committees. We have held 3 meetings this year. We're limited to 6 meetings in the year, so we can't meet too frequently. But if you have some questions and have a group of bills that you'd like us to comment on, we'd be glad to meet and see if we could come back with some information, suggestions, recommendations. The other piece, though, is that we have a budget of $500. We're a standing committee. We've been told that in order to be on the website on maine.gov so that we could tell people when we're having a public meeting, when we're having a public hearing, we would have to pay maine.gov at least $500 per month. That's a lot of bake sales. And we weren't ready to pass the hat for that. So if we're going to be a standing committee, and if we're going to be able to make sure that our meetings are advertised to the public, they can be attended by Zoom, but they can be advertised to the public, and we can get public comment during hearings. It would help if we could have a bit better of a budget so that we could afford a web presence in the state, just like other standing committees like the Right to Know Committee or some other standing committees that the legislature's created. And so with that, if I could just, with your indulgence, just ask the members of the commission who are here today, just raise their hand and give you their names so that they can introduce themselves to you. Thank you. Good.
My name is Roberta Manter. I live in Fayette. I'm the founder of Maine Roadways, which is an acronym for residents and owners on abandoned and discontinued ways. I'm glad to see a few familiar faces here. We've been before this committee for years trying to sort this out, and still haven't got it nailed down, but we've been chipping away on the edges of it. And I want to thank you very much, those of you who were on the committee that voted in this commission. This is a big step forward, and I really appreciate that. If you have any questions, I've been helping people research the status of their roads for, well, not quite the 40 years that I've lived on one, but getting close to it. So yes, getting pretty good at figuring out what the status of the road is, although there are still some that just defy definition.
Rebecca Graham, Maine Municipal Association's representative.
Catherine Nato, I put this bill in 2018. Sorry, ahead of time.
I'm Brian Bronson. I work for the Bureau of Parks and Lands, the Off-Road Vehicle Division, working with primarily ATV and snowmobile clubs.
Hi, my name's Pete Coughlin. I work at Maine DOT, and one of my jobs is taking care of all of the local road inventory in all the towns. And I'm always teaching people about the DOT map viewer, which Jim just mentioned. Great resource.
So thank you. If you have any questions for today, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Does anybody have any questions?
Otherwise,
Go ahead.
First, I want to thank you all for, if they're online, all 12 of you who have done this great work. I know I was on the summer committee that when we took it up, but what happens is legislatures people change and get off it. So we could never really get down to the bottom of it. So we wanted you guys to be the think tank on this and pull it all together. So thank you for doing your work and volunteering and helping the state of Maine in a lot of ways. I know that there's a lot of litigation over this stuff, and there's a lot of personal stories, and there's all these things. And I think you bringing the point about the terminology. I mean, a private way, a private road, and it's on this and it's on that. I think clarification of that is absolutely needed. And I see that Senator Vitelli has a bill in, it's LD 461, right? And she lays out some of those definitions in that bill. And I'm wondering if you have had a chance to look at that and agree or not agree, or
As a committee, we haven't had a chance to take a look at that. We had all we could do to get this to you for February 1st. But we do have that role. And if you want to ask us for an opinion on that or for our suggestions, we'd be happy to do so.
that would be great. Ms. Mantor?
I can tell you a little bit more about that, which is that
Can you come,
bill
I'm
is-
sorry, can
Roberta,
you
if you
come up
could
to the
please come on up.
microphone? Yeah,
Identify yourself.
and again, tell us who you are and where you're from.
I'm Roberta Manter. I live in Fayette, and I'm the founder of Maine Roadways, which is an acronym for Residents and Owners on Abandoned and Discontinued Ways. I can speak to that a little bit because I'm also on the board of directors for the Maine Alliance for Road Associations, which is the people who came up with the idea for this bill. They have, since that was submitted, they've been consulting with an attorney, and they're totally revamping the whole thing. So what you have been able to see so far is not what will be eventually presented. There'll be some amendments to it. I do know that they're working very hard to try to straighten out the terminology. They've been advised that they shouldn't try to define private road because there are too many things that fit that terminology. But they are going to try to straighten out the private ways, public easements piece of it, because as Mr. Katsifikas said, there are two different definitions for private way. And we're trying to go through all the places where that term appears in the statutes and sort out which ones are referring to public easements and which ones are more referring to private roads, and try to separate the two of them so that we don't have this one word with two different definitions. They're also working on the inventory piece. We know that this is something that's been brought before the legislature a couple of times before and been turned down because it was just going to be too burdensome on towns. And so what I think they're going to be suggesting is just an inventory of roads that are maintained by the town, which the DOT already has, and roads that are maintained privately, which I believe E911 has some of that information. I'm not sure exactly how that works. But hopefully this will be a doable inventory, which does not include abandoned and discontinued roads. But if they're not on one of those two lists, then presumably they are an abandoned or discontinued road. So that would be a starting place at least. And then maybe we can bring in the other information bit by bit as it becomes more available, hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me continue. My bringing up Senator Vitelli's legislative document with the terminology there, if it would be very helpful to have deal with it differently. So I think if we could put the get that information soon. And got a bunch of notes.
We'll schedule a meeting though in order to be able to provide some comments,
Okay.
and we'll also look at what amendments might be forthcoming in case that should be addressed as well.
I just want to say on that, that bill is scheduled for a public hearing on March 28th. I think we'll have to take up what is proposed by the revisor's office as our public hearing. but then we could make amendments. I'm talking up to the crowd, but also to our analyst. We can make amendments during the work session, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we would hear the public hearing based on the publicly available language, legislative language, but then during our work session, which would be, I don't know if we've scheduled that. Not yet. We could deal with those amendments. So time is kind of, the clock is ticking. That's all I wanted to say. Good.
So are you saying that Senator Vitelli's hearing is on March 28th?
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, the liability issue is real clear, and I'm glad that you guys are getting through this. This has been 20 years of litigation, and we're trying to resolve that as a practical matter. The ADR, the yeah. I have some concerns about that.
But if you would have just a separate ADR track, there are attorneys municipal attorneys and real estate attorneys with a fair amount of experience in road law who might be able to hear those, although, that pool is getting smaller and smaller too.
Right. And that's why we have you guys as a panel of experts. I know that you're just, that you are professionals and you care deeply about this. And we do need it resolved. It's just a waste of time on everybody's. So in your recommendations, part 3, 2, nuanced issue.
Understood. This is your charge in the bill to, in the legislation to us. And so that's why it's in italics, but we know where to come to.
Yes. And on page 4, you talk about creation of a statutory limitation on liability. I would just add that you'd have to have notice and a public hearing on it or something. You can't, it just scares me that anybody could just.
Townway, and it has been discontinued. So it's no longer a way that the town has to maintain. Let's say Roberta lives on that road, just for instance, on that public easement. And so right now, the town has the right, but not the duty to fix that road. If the town meeting decides we're not going to fix Roberta's road this year, it's not in the budget. Roberta has to fix the road, and at least up to her house to get there. And yet she's liable if I go drive on that road and let's say I have an accident or something, I sue everybody in sight, right? I'm going to sue Roberta for fixing the road. Not fair, but that's what happens. So the question is, if Roberta, because the town doesn't fix the road, if Roberta fixes the road and does so in good faith, does a reasonable job, then she has liability, a lot of protection from liability. That protection would not be there if she did a shoddy job, if it were a less than appropriate, if there were negligence involved. We're not going to shield people from negligence. But if it's a good job done, then they'll be protected. That's the sort of thing we're looking at for legal protection.
Okay. And then you talked about on the same page, 4, second paragraph, there's also some support for ongoing payment to be made to the property owners if a townway is discontinued with retention of a public easement, but municipality does not exercise its right to maintain, repair, and or plow the way. So
we'll use Roberta's example.
Who's paying?
Well, that's the thing. She has spent her own money to fix the road up because the town isn't going to do that. There were some commissioners who thought it would be fair for the municipality to be paying to Roberta. I understand. I'm saying there's as in any group, there's a diversity of opinion. And there were some commissioners who thought that it would be fair in this instance to pay the landowner where the landowner has to pay out of his or her own pocket for something because the town has declined to do it. I certainly understand there's another position on that from the municipal side. We wanted to at least let you know of the divergence of opinion.
Well, I just wanted to say that mandates are extremely unpopular
No.
with legislators. So I would hesitate on that one big
Okay.
time.
Could I speak to that one for just a minute?
Mhm.
What I have thought of, and this is not necessarily the commission's opinion on it, but either something like a tax abatement for people that own these roads. Because what they're doing, if you think about it, is they're paying taxes to the town for road maintenance, which doesn't go into their road. And then they're paying again to maintain the road, which the public can use. So a tax abatement would be one possibility. Another possibility is that on some of these roads, there actually is a road association, but the town owns land on the road and the town refuses to contribute to the road association.
Well, I
So if
can
the public
understand
is
that.
using that road and the private individuals are maintaining it, but the public has land that they have to access, shouldn't they need to be a member of the road association?
Well, I'm making an assumption that the town owned the property before the houses were built. I mean, that's an assumption in this one scenario. There were
Not
tons of
necessarily.
scenarios and we can go there all the way.
Mhm.
You know, and when I'm wicked thrilled that the MDOT has a listing of all that, because one of the issues that I was thinking about was that the realtors, if a realtor is used or not, somebody could look it up. So that if you bought it full knowing, then it's your obligation. So that's just one thing. And somebody said here, there should be no automatic anything. I vote for no automatic anything. And you talk about how the inconsistency on determining the status of a municipal road and with terminal, you know, if that's something you guys could focus on, that would be really helpful because I think that that's where we are in trouble here. And you asked about $500 a month for the transparency. I can't say enough about transparency, so I like that, and I think $500 a month for the work that you do to be public and to receive public input. That's a no-brainer for me. I think that we should do that. And so you talked about seller's disclosure. I'm glad you brought that up. It would be great if we can get that done, but of course, like you said, everybody checks unknown.
But if it could be tied to checking the DOT tool that we now know about, that might be an easy way to check that box, and it might be more reliable and get you better information.
Okay, and so when we set up the commission and went through all that, it's set up so that this committee can initiate legislation based on what you all come up with. So at this point, I'm not going to make the motion just yet, but I would make a motion in a few minutes once everybody has had their say, that we make a motion to authorize $500 a month for your transparency. And I'm sure other people have questions. I'll stop now, but I just want to say I appreciate very much, and I understand the importance of this. I lived on a private road myself one time, and I was a city councilor in Saco, and we had discontinued road problems all over the town. From a municipal standpoint, it was a nightmare. From the people who want to do things, it was a nightmare. So I empathize with your situation, and thank you for your help and guidance.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
You want him or me?
Him.
Okay.
Settle.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the commission for their work. I too have history with the discontinued roads situation from back in the service in the 127th legislature. We had numerous bills that year as well. But just wanted to indicate that this was a point that was made. You know, we're talking about a bill that hasn't come before us yet, but we have the option to carry that bill over there, you know, rather than just act on a bill and they haven't had a chance to review it, that they can only meet 6 times in a year, trying to get them to meet on one particular bill. We could certainly carry a bill over and deal with it next session. That was just my thought, especially since we're going to need time to absorb all of their recommendations and report out potential legislation, which would include the funding mechanism that was just referenced.
Well, I think we need to fund. I think we need the funding now.
Well, we're allowed to report out.
Yeah, but we can report out a committee bill. I believe.
Take your seat.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So there's a few different options with respect to funding, additional adding funds. That actually, since the report back of the budget, I hate to do this, but the report back for the budget is due this afternoon. Committees are allowed in their report backs on the budget to recommend additional appropriations or allocations. So if the committee wanted to recommend that this budget, biennial budget, provide funds to, I don't know who that to would be, to pay for $500 a month. That is something that the committee could do to add it to the biennial budget. The other option is that the committee has another work session on this report back. You talk about whether the committee wants to report out a bill, which you then report out and the legislature refers it back. And then you work the bill and come up with language which could include funding. And it could include a lot of the different recommendations that were in the bill or in the report. And as Representative Greenwood said, you can then, if you don't get that work done this session, carry that bill forward into the second regular to complete it then. If that made sense to everyone.
So we have two options. We can report out a bill today, for example, that would provide the $500 a month to the commission to fund the website.
Today, you could add to the report back letter to AFA, recommending that they do that. Yes. That's not reporting out a bill. That's just making a recommendation to
Okay.
AFA. So that is one option. Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would make that motion.
Yeah, that,
Second.
yeah, I'm thinking that's a good thing at this
Okay.
point.
Astounded by how much time is taken by this committee on this particular subject. And we cannot ever seem to move forward. And this is the first time that looks like we're taking a concrete action here to make something happen around that. So I truly appreciate the work the commission does. And I would think you want to take a look in the future about a real budget and see, this is going to get you recognized, but there may be more things that need to happen. And I'd like to know what it might take to get us from point A to point B without going another 50 years.
Representative Underwood.
I just wanted to know what is the process for reporting out a bill? Is that, I assume this the route we're taking, correct?
That's correct, Representative Underwood. So this would be a committee bill. The
Correct.
statute allows the committee to report out a bill. You would vote that you want to report out a bill, and that goes to the House and the Senate, and they have to vote to refer that bill back to you, the committee. Then the committee has a public hearing and works that bill. And if they vote it, well, then it goes back to the House and Senate. So it's a bit of a longer process. But it starts with the committee deciding what they want to do.
Okay, I was more or less concerned with the processes. Could you explain what a public easement is? Define it in layman's terms.
Sure, I'll do my best. Here we
Good
go.
luck. Right.
In 25 words or fewer. It's basically, it's a way, a type of way. But a public easement is one that it can arise in three ways. It could be a leftover from discontinuance or statutory abandonment. It's retained and the public has a right of access over that public easement. And the town has the right, but not the duty to maintain it. So the public can use it. You can use it for recreational purposes. You can use it for your car. You can use it for whatever it will support. So that's the public easement. It also can happen if the town wants to create a way to get to a recreational facility, to a lake or to a river segment or something. You could get a public easement that way. And then all the old private ways that used to go from the farm to the town to carry your goods in that were laid out back in the days when we were part of Massachusetts and since then also became public easements. But a public easement is nothing more than a right of the public to pass over a way. And the right, but not the obligation of the town to maintain that same way.
Thank you. This $500, we're gonna create a bill. We haven't got to work it.
Sorry,
Oops.
we're not creating a bill yet. The $500 is going to be a recommendation to AFA to fund their website, the commission's website.
Okay,
Access on the state website.
Right.
Right.
So we can go pay OIT and get on maine.gov.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just thrilled about this. I'm wondering if you can put us on, I don't know if anybody else wants to be, but I'd like to be on your email so I can see what's going on with the committee. And if you get a website, I want to like go look at it right away. And
We will.
sorry, I'm a little passionate about this.
I can tell. And thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions before I wrap up? Okay. So first of all, I want to thank the members of the commission. I'm a true believer of if you volunteer to help government figure out a way to resolve a problem, and we should institute your recommendations. I don't believe we should take your report and go, wow, this is really thick and that's good. And we're going to put it right up here and we'll look at it in 20 years. So I do appreciate that. So it sounds like LD 461 is making an attempt to clear up some of the definitions, which may be good, needs to be analyzed, right? And then maybe a bill that would give a statutory limitation of liability. So those are two things that we probably should take care of this session.
It may take a little longer on the liability piece, but there are some examples out there. There's a limitation of liability for recreational use of lands, for example, so you can open your lands up to people to use. And there's also some other examples that we could draw on.
Okay.
It's just like I say, putting this report together took long enough
Yeah,
that we didn't have time
no,
to draft any
absolutely.
legislation. But what we can do is schedule a meeting. It takes at least a week's notice, public notice to do that. And if we can try to do that by the end of the month, we'll see if we can get everyone together.
And I live in Wyndham, which is the mecca of private roads. More than half of the town's roads are private. I just remember when I first got on the council, there was some discussion about private roads, and the town manager said to us that this is not easily understood. Just do what I tell you to do. And so we did. And I think all we did was kick the can down the road another 20 years.
Having once represented the town of Wyndham, I understand.
Yeah. So I guess my is the definitions and the limitation of liability. That's not going to resolve this problem.
Not entirely, but if we can start cleaning it up,
Mhm.
it's a beginning.
Right. What would be step number 3? I've got step 1 for cleaning up the definitions, step 2 for statutory limitation of liability, and then is that something that the commission would need to meet on?
We would need to poll the commission and see what we'd recommend being the third step. Ultimate, and maybe the third step would have to do with the disclosure requirement and tying that more to the available databases so that there's useful information out there for people buying property in Maine to
Okay.
have fewer complaints, or at least we hope so.
Right,
And that would probably be the logical third step as I think about what we were looking at. Disclosures and then, for years, I worked at Maine Municipal Association and we would advise our towns to put together road inventories. Nobody wants a mandate. Nobody wants an unfunded state mandate, but I think to the extent that municipalities can put that information together and make it available to the public, there'll be fewer of these issues. In the end, anytime there's a road dispute, it's a matter of fact and law. It's highly fact specific and it tends to lead to litigation when people get upset enough. But if we can try to control what we can control, we can try to minimize those disputes.
yes.
I have a question for you. Maybe the gentleman from the DOT can talk about it. But we had some discussion about that last session in the 130th. And it was about that, isn't there some reporting need that the municipalities is supposed to give you on what roads they have and all that? We couldn't really drill down into what that was all about, but I'm hoping you can.
So one of the sessions a couple years ago, there was a requirement for me to report back here, and it gave towns the option to provide an inventory. Originally, it was a shall, but it was changed to a may.
Okay.
And it said every town may develop an inventory and send it to DOT. And I put a report together that was this, and as far as words on a page, was 2 sentences. I got 0, as expected, because we already have a pretty good inventory of most town roads because the local road assistance program is dependent. The money that we send out from the department is based on that inventory. So if the inventory is wrong, the dollars are wrong that go to every town. So we make quite an effort to try to keep these inventories up to date. We meet with towns fairly regularly. I take calls every day from towns and we kind of invite ourselves in if we're going up to a certain part of the state. I got one of my staff people. I got 2 staff people. She's going down east and meeting with the county and a town down there in a couple of weeks because we need to do an inventory. Every time we have an issue that come up with a town, we kind of invite ourselves in and say, hey, can we come in and do an inventory? It might have been 15 or 20 years. And they're more than happy to have us show up and do it because what I do to update this stuff also gets sent over to the 911 Bureau. So they benefit from this review too.
Right, that's what I remember.
The one thing to consider though is that Maine DOT's tool tells you what's publicly maintained. It doesn't tell you what the legal status is of the road. And that's not a fault of DOT.
No.
That's just it. So is it a public easement or is it a town way? You can't tell.
Right.
It just know that the town is maintaining that particular road. It's helpful. It's helpful if you're buying property, but it doesn't tell you the legal status of it.
Yeah,
So
I
Right.
tell people that all the time is, if I go to a town, I say, I am here to confirm with you, what do you maintain? I'm not here to find out what the legal status is. One would assume that if the town's maintaining it, it is indeed a town way. But
or
I'm
a
not,
public easement.
or
That
a
the town
public
has
easement,
agreed to
correct.
maintain. That the town
But-
has agreed to maintain.
all I'm interested in what the statute says is I have to keep track of what they maintain, whether it's year round or summer only or winter only. Wyndham's got a lot of those seasonal roads.
So I'm wondering about, so like going back, grandfathered versus not, if your committee or whatever we've called you, can look in, or at one point, whatever step you want. I'd like to know your recommendation on, is this going forward for forward sales? Or, there are people who we know have logging trucks going through their driveway, so we need to consider that too. But if that's something that you guys could opine on, I'd appreciate it.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you again for your time. Appreciate it very much. And we look forward to working with the committee going forward.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.